Right, joining me today on this stand is Michael Terwey, the Director of Public Engagement and Research at the National Trust for Scotland, Lily Pender and Josh Gaillemin, partners of theWholeStory. They are here today to talk about creating a sustainable culture of engaging visitors through tours. Now, don't worry if you need to skip out, because these sessions are being recorded and you will all receive all of the videos after the show has finished, probably a little while after the show's finished, because let's face it, there's a lot of editing to be done. So don't worry if you do need to go off. But for now, can you give them a warm welcome? And I'll hand over to you.
Good afternoon. It's lovely to see you. I'm here, as we just heard, with Josh, who is my business partner from theWholeStory. And we are delighted that we'll be able to tell you what we've been doing for the last few years with the National Trust for Scotland, with Michael, who is also with us. Now, a little brief introduction as to who on earth Josh and I are of theWholeStory, if you don't know. We are concerned with the built-in toolbox that we all have as human beings that allow us to be a very special and amazing species of communication. We believe that storytelling is this internal toolbox for communication. With it, we understand better. With it, we're able to create connection and engagement. With it, we are able to share knowledge and ideas and dreams and hopes and culture and what has happened and is happening and will happen better. And our training and workshops for museums and galleries and outside spaces, anything you want to put under the sort of heritage and culture and history umbrella, our training with these places is about enhancing the skills of visitor-facing staff and volunteers to be able to use storytelling to be that part of the kind of human-to-human interpretation. And we do work that is about conversations and answering questions and introduction talks. Sometimes it's about finding the story that a place or a collection is best able to tell. And this often becomes a tour. And this is the work that we've been doing with the National Trust for Scotland since our first meeting in about 2019. Something which I'm sure you know interrupted that progress. But for the last 3 years or so, we've been asking the question, and I think starting to find some really good answers about what makes a good tour. What makes a good tour for the people delivering it? What makes a good tour for the people who are experiencing the tour? And what makes a good tour for curators and historians? And what makes a good tour for wherever that tour is taking place? And I think for Josh and I, it's been a really wonderful process of honing our techniques and our workshops and how we use storytelling in order to create, but also deliver tours. And I think it's probably best that I hand over to Michael now so that he can give you a far better sense about why this was important to the National Trust for Scotland.
Thank you, Lily. So for those of you who are not familiar with the National Trust for Scotland, I'm sure everyone here is, but we are... Oh. Can everyone hear me? Is that better? Good, excellent. So for those of you who are not familiar with the National Trust for Scotland, we are one of Scotland's largest conservation charities. We care for over 100 different heritage sites across the country, from country houses and castles to islands, mountains and glens. We have 300,000 members and we have kind of over 3 million visits a year. Two things to understand about the National Trust for Scotland. The first is we are completely independent of government, so we are not dependent on the Scottish Government for our funding, and we are completely independent of the National Trust in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, which is a constituted and separate charity from us. We are roughly a tenth of the size by turnover and membership of the National Trust in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. When I joined the National Trust for Scotland in 2018, I was very interested with a background in interpretation and a remit to look at what we were doing around public engagement and interpretation in the Trust. I was really interested in the ways in which the Trust was supporting people doing guided tours. So I was a bit surprised to find that there was actually no support in place whatsoever. Tour guides at properties were allowed to learn on the job from other people who were there. And while there were definitely some very talented people who were kind of able to tell a brilliant story and connect people with the past and with history really, really effectively, there were also a lot of people who are unable to do that. Given how important a guided tour is to the National Trust for Scotland, a large number of our visitors experience a tour, not just in houses, but also in gardens with gardeners or in the countryside with our countryside rangers. It seemed important that we were able to put in place some training and support to enable our staff to deliver brilliant visitor experiences and great interpretive experiences. So I started off with trying a number of different workshop models, all of which were unsuccessful, largely because they were based on individual one-off interventions with groups of people. We did some really exciting and creative pieces of work around interpretation planning, around performance skills, or even narrative structure. But all of them were kind of ultimately unsuccessful because they weren't regular ongoing activities. And a lot of these things, given the high turnover of staff, particularly due to the disruption during COVID, felt that we made some interventions and then everything was replaced by a new group of staff at the end of it. And that was sort of all the learning was lost. So we realized that what was really important is that we needed a model that for us tours were not about one-off investments in training and content, but actually needed to be integrated within ongoing operational activities. And that's where, working with theWholeStory, with Josh and Lily, we devised a particular model which certainly fits the needs of the National Trust for Scotland. Josh.
Hi. I just wanted to go through that model with you so that you can replicate it at your sites and see if it's something that's useful for you. Lily and I have been working together for 20 years, and in that time of delivering workshops, we've done a lot of work on tour training, and there's almost two extremes in what you get in tour training, from what Michael was talking about, when it is the guides who are left to their own devices to come up with tours, and the benefit from that is huge because you get that personality, that enthusiasm, that passion, that specialist knowledge, all of that coming through. But sometimes that specialist knowledge can be so niche that it's actually quite a small audience that it attracts. And it can go all the way to the other end when you've got curators, historians, site managers, whoever it might be, writing a script and asking people to memorize it word for word. And then the guide doesn't feel that they're there at all. They feel slightly lost because they're just trying to remember the order in which the words went rather than the purpose behind it. And they're unable to adapt and change depending on who's in front of them. Yeah. And as we all know in interpretation, depending on the group, depending on the time of day, depending on the travel that they've had to get there, depending on what they have for breakfast. I mean, there's a million reasons why you're going to have to adapt and change what you're saying to the people in front of you. So when it was fully scripted, it would have probably been simpler for people just to have been given an audio guide at that point and to walk around in their own time. So Lily and I were trying to find in our training, how can we make both of these sets of people happy, bearing in mind that the reason that the curators want to get it right and the reason that the guides want to bring themselves to it is so that the visitors get the best experience and the best understanding of that site and the best connection to it. So we've created trainings and workshops that I think marry those two requirements, those two needs, with the visitor in mind. And one of the key things that we use for this is something that we've created called anchors. Certain key things that anchor each of the tours and each of the stops that every guide will say, so that it is site-specific, it is relevant, it is correct, because you may have gone and done your own research, but the curator says it's this, and therefore this is what it is. And it's correct in that way, but still has the freedom for each of the guides to bring themselves to it, even to choose which stories would get that point across best for the audience in front of them. And I would just like to outline these anchors to you, and then also outline the Train the Trainer program that we ran for Michael, so that if you're thinking of training your staff in this way, you've got an idea of the amount of time it would take you to do so. The anchors are actually very simple. I mean, as Lily said, storytelling is something that's been around forever. It is just a human trait. And what we have tried to do in our training is to keep simplifying things so that only what is needed is shared and the freedom around it comes across as well, and it's not too didactic. The anchors for the tour itself, you need a subject for your tour. When we used to do training and you would have lots of different guides coming from each guide coming and choosing their favorite thing and creating one stop based on their favorite item within a space, you then had a tour which at best you could claim was a highlights tour, but really didn't have a theme to it or didn't have an overview to it. And sometimes the stories may not have been told in the right place. So we need to start with the subject. This is what this tour is about. And then what we have come up with a name for as the angle. What is the way through that you're going to have? What is the theme? What is the story? What is the outcome that you want visitors to leave with? When they have left, they have a greater understanding, a greater love of, a greater connection to whatever it might be. So that angle has to be really clear, and it goes threads through the entire tour. And the third one is deciding what stops you want and what order you want them in. Is it a chronological connection? What is the reason that you have it? Is it just the only path that you have through the space, and therefore you have to pick the stories that fit around that, but having real clarity on it? And then we come to the anchors for each of the stops, because each stop is like a chapter within the overall story of the tour. And here again, we have a subject, we have an angle for each stop. Each story has its own outcome, its own learning. And then we have this idea of 3 layers, because Lily and I realized that stories actually are just a way of vocalizing life. And life doesn't just happen to one person in the abstract on their own. Life is happening all the time to individuals, to groups. There is society's context, all of these things intermingling. So we want this to be thought about when we're preparing each stop. What are the individual stories we want? Who are the protagonists to the stop? You might have 1, 2, maybe 3 people, so that their experience lets us understand and go into that moment with them. There is then the community or organization or group experience that is there, that gives the collective feel of what is happening. And then there is the largest context. What is it that this stop and this story is telling you about history, or about culture, or about economics, or about the environment, or whatever the particular theme that you want to have there? Some people in your audience, some of the visitors are big picture and just want those context stories. And some people can only get it if they have those individual stories that come because they're detail people or people. So yet again, this is one of the ways that you're making sure you're reaching everyone and allowing them to connect with the story you have. I'm just a people person. If it was down to me, I wouldn't have any of the context stuff there because it doesn't interest me. But this is the mistake that often happens. We're not doing the tour just to please ourselves. It is for our audience. And the audience is made up of of different learning types and different connective types of people. So you have those 3 layers. And then we also had a really clear structure into each of the stories. There would be a hook, a beginning, a middle, an end, and a link. This seems incredibly basic, but so many things, like my talk here, just dive off in all sorts of directions. When you have this structure, it's much clearer for people. You come in, there's a hook, there's a statement, there's a question, there's a fact. There is something that just grasps you so you know where you are. And then the beginning, what do you see? What is it in the room, in the countryside, the particular tree, the particular object? What is it that is best going to tell the story of that space? So the beginning places us and makes sure that everything we say is absolutely site-specific. The middle is where the story takes place. This is the journey of the characters, the understanding, how it's made, how it was used, who it belonged to, what it symbolizes, whatever it might be, all comes there. And the end gives you a proper understanding of why this stop and this story has such importance and such importance to the site. And then we move to the link to the next stop. And the link to the next stop is there to get people, to just give them a flavor of what's coming next, to excite their imagination, to start their thinking. It is certainly not saying, and now we are going to move into the great dining hall where I'm going to tell you about X, Y, Z, which is what I've heard on probably 90% of the tours I've been on, and it just feels like such a wasted opportunity. So this was the general structure and what I would recommend you go for when you are training and helping your staff. It gives them everything, but you're not telling them what story to tell. They know what the outcome is. They know the characters. If you're doing a story in the Queen's bedroom and you know the character is Mary, Queen of Scots, and you've done all the work because you know what the outcome is and you know what you want people to leave with, Well, there are 30 stories about Mary, Queen of Scots that you could tell. So it keeps it fresh for the guide as well. They bring their favorites, they bring their connections to it, but it is still getting the point across that you as the curator or the historian or the site manager want to get across. You're having both of those freedoms and structure in the same place. Now, I also wanted just to mention a little bit about the amount of time, and this is something I'm eternally grateful to Michael for, the amount of time he has given us and the amount of time that is required in training up guides to be able to share stories in a way that connects with and really makes sense to all of the different types of audiences that they have. Lily and I, we've been doing this for 20 years. The smallest tour training time that we were given would be with groups of 24 volunteers, where the entire tour training took place over 4 hours. 4 hours to understand storytelling, to understand what a tour was, to understand how to interact. I'm happy to say it probably didn't work. We did our absolute best, but there's only so much you can ask. With Michael, we are having 4 days. 4 days of training, and the actual train the trainer program, the people that we are training to deliver it, we have 12 days of face-to-face with them. This sounds extraordinary, but if I break it down, it will make sense as to why this amount of time guarantees a really high quality end product. The first half day, and because they're up north and we're down south, we did this one online, it's just understanding what do we want to get from the training. Rather than jumping straight into it, actually having an agreement with everyone in the space. What do we want to get from this? How is it going to work? What do tours mean to us? How is it going to take place? Where is it going to take place? Getting all of that agreed. So there is an understanding and an expectation from people as to what will happen. And then we would come up for 2 days. We would have a host site, because we would then have pairs from 5 different sites coming and joining us. And at that host site, we would do our first walk round on day 1, 2 days for the first visit, a walk round on day 1, finding all the stops, hearing ideas about it, and finding out the anchors that had been prepared for the whole of the tour. This is very helpful. People understand what the concept of the anchors are and have the beginning of an understanding of what the tour is going to be all about. The second day, because so much of this, if you're doing train the trainer, is to make sure they are able to facilitate and deliver it themselves, would be Lily and I helping them understand how are they going to be doing this initial part with their colleagues when they get back to their site. We would then leave them for a bit, come back a week later, and we would come up for 3 days, for days 2, 3, and 4 of the training. On day 2, this was called Finding the Stop Story. We would spend the whole morning using storytelling techniques to pick apart and look at that stop and find all of the different information you could have and a number of different ways in which you could share it, depending on who your audience was and depending on the reactions you were getting from them. And then in the afternoon, we would do a first draft walkthrough tour of the space. Just a 2.5 minutes for each stop when we would be building up to 5. The main mistake people make is that there is far too much information packed into everything that they say. So if you can get a simple version of it in 2.5 minutes, you can then add the description, the detail, all the things that make it beautiful and engaging, but you have the right amount of content there. You're not packing it with so much information that there's no way of storifying it and making it beautiful. The other purpose of doing this walk around is it means you are making sure that the curators, the historians, the information is correct and in the right place, but you are also making sure that the guides are bringing themselves to it and having their aspect of it, the talk, the practice, the element of reality and walking the space so that they are getting ready as well. On the second day of this visit, which is day 3 of the tour, we're looking at creating the stop story, where it's all about spoken exercises, pair exercises. You never write yourself a script. You're always changing how you're doing it, dealing with questions, adding descriptive language, finding ways to look at whose perspective or point of view is represented, what happens when you look at it from somebody else's, from someone who was there at a time, from an object's perspective, from your audience's perspective. What insights does it give you to the story and what you have? And then again in the afternoon, we do a walk round of the tour. So there is a second practice, a second draft, and this time it is 5 minutes long. And then on the last day, day 4 of the training, we work with them to think, how do you make this an interactive tour? and how do you build the experience for your audience? And Lily and I have been defining experience as what people think and speak, what people sense and feel, and what people do. Think, feel, and do. So each of the pairs are starting to think, at my stop, what could I do to get my audience involved? And again, this really depends on the personality of the guides. Some of them are all singing and dancing and really like to get involved. Other people are calmer and more introverted, but will have something gentler and softer that can happen. It doesn't mean that at each stop there is going to be an intervention, but there is a selection to choose from so that the guide is comfortable with all the things they can do. But also, once they've started the tour, certain groups are going to want to do lots of stuff, and other groups, I just want to hear you. I just want to listen, and I just want to find some stuff out. Thank you very much. So they have a selection of things of small or much larger scale that they can use to involve and engage their audiences. So that's the end of that training. But then we need to prepare them. Michael was saying the importance is having people there who've taken part in it and who can then keep creating new tours at each site, but also encouraging their teams and other teams at other sites to make sure that they're using the intervention and putting it into practice all the time. So we gave them 3 days of facilitation training where they got to practice setting each and every one of the techniques so that everybody was ready and understood how they did it. They got to cheat a little bit and redraft the stop that they had with the perfect examples. So then when they are setting it to their colleagues and asking them to do it, they have the perfect example from their training to give absolute clarity to their colleagues of what they should need. And we also created, which I would recommend that you do for your teams, just a trainer manual pack with things like timetables, slide decks, and answers to the most frequent questions that you expect they'll have, so that they are really practiced in it and ready to go. We would then give them time to prepare their first day when they do the walk around, when they do the anchors with their colleagues. And then either Lily or I went to visit each of them back at their own sites whilst they delivered that 3-day block of training with us there to either support them or to help them. So that's 11 days of face-to-face. And then we had a last half day online at the end to review everything that we'd done and to really make sure that they were able to mesh and join together as a whole cohort to support each other. I overemphasize the time because I think very often training interventions are done as one-offs. Well, we've paid something, we've got some people in, we're doing something here, but there isn't the follow-on work afterwards. And then actually the learning, however enjoyable it is during the training that you're offering them, doesn't get put into practice. But if you have all of this time and then a large qualified group of people who are able to support them, it is much more likely to become embedded into the organization, to become part of the culture. But also, we were working with managers. It just showed that it was taken more seriously. It wasn't just something for volunteers to do. It was something everybody was involved with. Michael is tip-top at the top of the National Trust for Scotland, but he would turn up to our trainings. He would turn up to watch some of them deliver their trainings, showing a real involvement all the way through the trust and really taking it seriously and showing that it was valued at all time, not just for the financial investment, but the time investment of Michael, of managers, of staff, and of volunteers. And that's why I think this has been probably it has been the most successful set of training that Lily and I have offered in 20 years, because there has been the work beforehand to prepare people so they know why it's happening, the time spent during it, and then the time spent afterwards to make sure that it's put into practice. Now, I need to shut up at this point. I can see taps on watches, so I'm going to hand back.
Thank you. So just to kind of finish, obviously working with Josh and Lily is a lot more fun than a lot of the other things I have to do in my job, which is why I spend so much time with them. But I just wanted to say a little bit about the outcomes and impact on the trust. So we're starting to see now a real difference in visitor survey results and mystery visit data between the places where we've done this training intervention and places where we haven't. So we are seeing the impact on visitors come through in that way. From from our staff, they're telling us that actually individually, this program, partly because of its length and its intensity, has been brilliant for their CPD. So they're growing confidence in a whole range of different areas, as well as a lot of the skills that they learn on the course are transferable across a whole range of other engagement and communication activities that they might do. Across the organization, we're starting to see really great impact at different properties as well. So one of our people who've been trained use this as a model for team building at their property with all their new staff to learn about the history of the place, the story they want to tell, and again, have all those impacts around kind of confidence and skills development for their teams. And of course, because for me, the really important long-term impact is going to be about culture and support within the organization as a whole. We get everyone together on a regular basis to kind of who've been through the program to share their experiences, talk about how things are going, and provide each other with that kind of peer-to-peer support as well. So we've been doing this for a couple of years now, but I'd say the early signs of impact and outcomes are really, really positive for the trust. I think that's us. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. The best talks for me have a story and deliver real, genuine impact to people. And from what I've seen from people scribbling notes frantically as you were talking, you've certainly nailed that one today. So thank you. Right. We've got 5 minutes. Do we have any questions for any of our speakers today? Any questions? Yes, we've got two questions. One here and then one in the middle. There's a microphone coming.
It's short lead.
Where is it? Where's the mic?
No.
My mic. Hogging the mic as usual. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hello.
Is that working? I can't.
Yeah.
I thank you for mentioning Mary Queen of Scots. By the way, I work at Sheffield Manor Lodge, her prison. So we still want to have you at some point. Yes. We offer guided tours, and we need to go through a process like you've just described because we've historically had friends of groups doing them who have been in the best way possible an aging group, so they're less wanting to do it. COVID affected it and whatnot, so we need new life in our tours. Do you find that in terms of offering guided tours, they're better received fewer through the month? So at the moment we're offering guided tours every single Sunday all throughout the year, whereas if we've put on something more special with, like you say, a specific theme or an anchor, it's much better that there seems to be more of an uptake. So we go through several Sundays of no one,
Yep.
but then we'll put on a special. Oh, yeah.
I believe you should have a
Hang on.
core tour. I believe you should have a core tour. So you've got the anchors that tell the main story of your site, your collection, wherever it is.
Yeah.
And then you can have a selection of specialist tours, or maybe one that suits a particular season. So you've got that main one that tells the story that you want to tell. But it could be within your tour guides that you've got a few of them who are an expertise in this area, or you know that now it's springtime, we've got to talk about the daffodils. Or it's Christmas, so let's have a Christmas themed one. So I think you need, the anchors exist even for that core workshop. And you can, and this is another part of the sustainable thing, is that you've either got all of the techniques you can repeat to create new tours, or you've got the techniques and the know-how to be able to evolve that core tour. So that actually as you learn new things or you get new information or you realize it's not relevant anymore, well, then you change those anchors and you evolve and you develop that. Michael, you might have a comment on that too, though.
Yeah, so I would agree with that generally, because I think the core tour in some ways is a sort of fundamental interpretation plan for a site, understanding what it is the core significance of something. But we're starting to think about a whole range of additionalities, whether it's for certain people, so gardeners or building surveyors who can do hard hat tours. We're also starting to think a lot more seriously about those seasonal tours. We've got some work going on around ghost tours and kind of Halloween-based supernatural tours as well. So I'd agree with Lily. Should stand there in the middle.
Thank you.
One more question. Here you go. Thank you.
Hi. How do you manage the time commitment that you're asking volunteers to sign up for with the extended length of with the additional days of the training?
Let's imagine that you've got a very large cohort of volunteers, 20 to 30 maybe. I know it can often be hundreds, but let's say it's 20 to 30. I would say initially choose or get them to select, say 8 volunteer tour guides. That group of 8 are going to create your main tour. So they're going to take part in those 4 days in order to get those main anchors and your main resources of like the starter tour. It's a bit like bread making now. And then you can probably work with your other tour guides, either on a slightly more broken down process, you know, every afternoon for a month, or once a week, every Monday afternoon for a month. Or you pull them together for 2 days. And over that shorter period, they have a chance to work through all of those different techniques in order to lift that tour off the page, to bring those anchors to life. So those 4 days are really important in order to make sure that you've got that creation and the delivery taken care of. But as you say, not everyone has that level of commitment that they can offer or are willing to. So there are ways around it.